Hello there, very good evening and welcome to tonight's program of Transition to Government. I'm your host, Eddie Lane, and I have with me in the studio Dr. Frank Anthony and Prime Minister-elect Brigadier Mark Phillips. Dr. Anthony, Brigadier Phillips, good evening and welcome to the program.
Well, good evening to you, Eddie, and thank you for having me on your program.
Good evening, Eddie. Good evening, Frank, and I'm happy to be here on the program. And good evening to all our listeners out there.
All right, so we have completed the recount aspect and the verification and certification aspect of the national recount. We are heading closer to the back end of this as we head towards um, the June 16th deadline for a declaration of the results. Dr. Anthony, you would have been at the tabulation center from the very onset and saw the process through. Brigadier Phillips, you would have been visiting the recount center ever so often. Um, Let us start off maybe by hearing from both of you uh, your thoughts on the process to this point. Dr. Anthony.
Thank you, Eddie. Well, as you rightfully said, I was there at the tabulation center, but I had the opportunity of seeing what was going on every day. So at the Artachon Convention Center, there were basically two things happening. One, there was counting happening at the various counting stations. And initially we were restricted to 10 stations. And then subsequently, two more were added. And so that with the additional two, they were able to process the boxes a little bit faster. When they open a box, they would go through a process at the counting station. And that process really is to open the box, take out its content, document whatever content there was, and having completed that, then they will proceed to count the ballots or to recount the ballots, because the ballots have already been counted at the polling station and was put into the ballot box. So basically what they have done there was to recount what was already counted. And then having counted or recounted the ballots at these counting stations, they generated something called a statement of recount, which differs from the night when elections would have happened. At those polling stations, you had a statement of poll, right? So there's a difference now because the product that emerged from the counting station is a statement of recount. And those statements of recount were then sent to a tabulation center inside the conference center there. And we then added up all these statements of recount. And so we went district by district and we were able to add them up. And so just recently, a couple of days ago, we were able to complete District 4 by adding all of the statements of recount. And then when we finish adding the statements of recount, a matrix is printed out, given to each of the parties that has been witnessing and that has participated in this recount process. And they would have sufficient time to go back to their parties, review those numbers that were generated at the recount, and then come back to the convention center for a certification process. What this certification process entails is that the supervisor for the tabulation from the GCOM side would call out back all the numbers and basically go through the tabulation sheet and ask if anybody has any objection to those numbers. And once there was no objections, he would then invite everyone present to come and sign a certificate to say that these numbers are correct. And so throughout the process, all the parties that took part in the elections in the various districts came forward and signed the certificate of recount. The APNU and AFC, who were there present throughout the process, with the exception of Region 1, where they signed, all the other regions, they did not sign the certificate. But all the other parties that took part did sign the certificate attesting to the accuracy of the numbers that came out in the recount. So I want to say publicly that, you know, we were there every single day, and the PPPC had a team in the tabulation room. There were 3 of us, and we can say that all the numbers that came up, that we were able to go box by box, and every single number that every single party got, we were able to verify that. And at the end of this exercise, it turned out that there was very, very little variance between the statements of recount and the statements of poll that was previously generated. The only place where there was a major difference was in Region 4, right? And that was because the numbers that Mr. Mingo declared varied vastly from the statements of poll. And it also varies from the statement of recount. So what you find in Region 4 is that the SOR generated from this recount process would match the SOP from Region 4. But where it comes to what Mr. Mingo declared, there's a 15,000 or so variance. And basically, he has given 15,000 more votes to the APNU and AFC, and he took away votes from the PPP. So that's where the fraud really took place, right? Every other region, SOP and SOR matches, excepting in Region 4. And I think by now the whole country understands that. And I think that is what the APNU and AFC is now trying to distract from. They don't want people to really say in a very clear-cut manner that this is where the fraud happened. And so they're coming up with all kinds of distractions to try to take people's mind away from the fraud that happened in Region 4.
Brigadier Phillips, you would have visited the Recount Center on several occasions. And I think Dr. Anthony has set the tone because, like he rightly said, there seems to be a deliberate effort, a concerted effort by the coalition to distract from the Mingo fraud. So they're coming up with all sorts of baseless allegations about the process.
Well, you know, let me start by saying, you know, when I visited the other Chong Conference Center and I went into those counting stations, what I saw was cases of conflict resolution in progress, in the sense that whatever disputes each party would have had there, they resolved it there. And if it could not have been resolved there, they had access to the commissioners, they had access to the chair of GCOM to resolve whatever disputes they had there. So in addition to saying every ballot box and every vote was counted, I think I should also add that issues pertaining to every ballot box and every vote had to go through the conflict resolution process before it could have been counted.
Yeah.
You know, and I must compliment the agents from all the different parties and the GCOM officials for working together. I know they could have done it within the 25 days, but we all know what took place with all the different observations and, you know, stoppages based on some of the observations from the representative of the APNU AFC, you know, that slowed the process down. But at the end, we were able to count all the votes. We achieved the first aim. Every vote must be counted.
Yeah.
Every vote was counted, you know. And the other important thing I want to mention here as we move on, we had less than 1% of all the votes counted. Less than 1% was rejected.
Yeah.
We had 460 something thousand votes counted and just about 4,100 rejected ballots. And in that group of rejected ballots, we had ballots that were rejected for the want of the official stamp. A small amount. And right away, I can use this statement to dispel one of the concerns raised by the APNU, that the joint services, that the discipline services votes were rejected for want of official stamp. We had 8,300, and I think 95% from the discipline services voted. And we had less than, I think, 500 votes that were rejected for want of the official stamp. So the discipline service votes were counted. And, you know, if I go on, there's so many other allegations made by the APNU, and they would like us to believe that only 100, I think 101,000 of those votes, according to them, were credible. So they were willing to throw away over 300,000 of the votes. But we have established from the statement of recount and from the certification that was signed for each district, 10 districts in all, as Dr. Frank Anthony mentioned, that all the votes were counted, all the votes were properly accounted for in the presence of the GCOM officials and the representative from all the parties. So we have successfully completed the recount. And I would like to congratulate GCOM and all the participating reps for the work that they put in for us to achieve that. So in effect, we finished stage one. You know, one of the leaders put out four stages. We finished stage one successfully. The matter now is in the hands of Mr. Lowenfield, and there's only one thing Mr. Lowenfield can do, is to compile the report as it is, right? With all the votes that were counted for each district and submit it to the GCOM commissioners. And he has until Saturday, the 13th, to do that. So Mr. Lowenfield is working on his report, and he has until Saturday, the 13th, to submit that report.
If I can add to you there, Brigadier, apart from the taking the matrices and put them together for that report, I think it's important that we emphasize the fact that Mr. Lowenfield is asked to do just a summary of the observation reports.
Exactly.
Just a summary that will accompany the tabulation, the tabulated votes for each party across the 10 districts. I know there are some limitations, Dr. Anthony, with regards to what Mr. Lowenfield is required to do.
Well, Mr. Lowenfield's role is very limited. One is that the 10 districts already have certified results, and each of the political party has a certificate of those results. So that the authenticity, the accuracy of those results have already been certified,
Exactly.
right? So each party now got certificates to say that this thing is certified. All Mr. Lowenfield has to do now is to add these 10 districts, the numbers that come from them, and he would get a number. And that then is submitted uh, as part of his report, right? So that's one. Then just like how we have accumulated over this period and came up with an aggregated number for a district, similarly, for each district, you now have to do a summary report, right? So that after every district was completed, a summary report of the observation was generated. And so what Mr. Lowenfield now got to do is to take those reports, observation reports, not at each ballot box, the summary one.
Yeah.
And he now makes a summary of those 10. So it's even simpler for him because he is summarizing from the 10 district reports, right? And then he put that as part of his report. So the work is really, a lot of the work has already been done. And in fact, that is captured very explicitly in paragraph 12 of the order that was gazetted, right? So GCOM had gazetted an order, and paragraph 12 talks about the function of the chief election officer. And basically, he now got to take the certified results from the 10 district and tabulate them and put that as part of his report, and then take this summary, make a summary of the observation report emanating from the 10 districts and put that as part of his report. So very simple thing, you know. So that when he does that and he put his report together, that is now sent to the commission, the chairwoman of the commission and the other commissioners, and they then would deliberate. Now, they give themselves adequate amounts of time because Mr. Lowenfield report is supposed to be in on or before the 13th of June. So he can send it way before that because a lot of this work has already been done. So he can send that early. And if he sends that early, then the commission can then start doing its work very early. But just in case, he has up to the 13th to be able to send that report in. And then the commission, the chairwoman and the commissioners have up to the 16th of June by which to make a declaration. So, you know, the Guyanese people have waited a long time, right? Because since the 2nd of March, we went to an elections, and, you know, just a couple of days after, you expect the declaration of a result. So we have waited quite a long time, and we are hopeful that, you know, this can sort itself out. These report from the chief election officer would get in there before the 13th, and that the commission can even make its decision before the 16th, so that we can have this election and its result behind us, and we can have the president being sworn in very quickly.
Dr. Anthony, notwithstanding what both you and Brigadier Phillips would have mentioned with regards to the remaining processes to complete GCOM aspect of the recount, I want to point you to Article 177 2B of the Constitution, because and this is because you're hearing statements from people like Joe Harmon and the others talking about um, verification is not declaration, and tabulation is not
Mhm.
declaration, and certification. All these fancy things. You know, sometimes you tend to question their legal training when you hear they make certain statements. But I want to point both of you to 177(2)(b) of the Constitution, and I'll read it. And then we can have some sort of discussion on this point. It says, and I quote, where there are two or more presidential candidates, if more votes are cast in favor of the list in which a person is designated as presidential candidate than in favor of another list, that presidential candidate shall be deemed to be elected president and shall be so declared by the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission. I think this statement is pellucid, and it almost directs GCOM as to what is required after a vote count or a recount, and the numbers are known.
Well, I don't think this was in dispute. Um, this part of the Constitution is very explicit. And actually, the heading under which that particular article comes, that heading is titled the President, and it gives the functions there, how a president is elected, and what are the functions of the presidency, and so forth. So it's very clear. And that is why Mr. Lowenfield's function in the order is very limited, because when he tabulates the certified results from the 10 district, he would know which of the lists would have received the most votes. And then he would put that in his report and send that report to the commission. Now, what the Constitution had contemplated was that these things would have been done in a very timely manner. What we have here, you know, is like you got like when you got a VCR and then you put it on slow, right? Right? So this up on slow right now. It's not playing at the regular speed. So it up on slow. So that is why these processes have been dragged out, right? So Mr. Lowenfield would make his report. And when he makes that report, it goes to the commission, and the commission has adequate time in which to make that declaration. But technically, there's very little else they can do, because they would receive a report that says that the PPPC has the most votes, because from each of the certificates that we have already completed, the whole country know, right, what is in those certificates. And I think all of us have gone through basic mathematics, so we can add up what is on the certificates, right? And we have already added what is on the certificate, and we know that the PPP is leading by 15,500 and something votes, right? So you can't erase that. That's there. Those numbers are there. And all Mr. Lowenfield, when he put that in his report and it goes to the commission would then have to make a declaration. But as I said, these things have been going on at a very slow pace, and we just have a couple more days. So I think the patience that the Guyanese people have shown, a couple more days would not hurt. All right? And we want that patience to continue. Don't be, as they say, provoked by some of the agents of the APNU and AFC who are very busy on social media trying to provoke people. Don't get provoked. I put up a post actually today on my Facebook page recalling that famous quote from Michelle Obama. And that is, when they go low, we go high, right? And I think that's very good advice for this season that we are in now, where there are desperate people who are trying to use all kinds of tricks in the book now to provoke people. Don't allow yourself to be provoked. In a couple of days, this would all be behind us.
I'm happy that you raised the point about being provoked, Dr. Anthony, because one of the things that we recognize, it seems as though the coalition has completely exhausted its bag of tricks or bag of excuses um, with regards to this elections. And we all know the excuses, one after the other, that they came up with. Um, Brigadier Phillips spoke to the one that they were using about 8,000 joint services votes not being counted, um, about documents missing, and all sorts of things. They have now moved to a level where I think they're inciting. They've moved to inciting people, because I showed a video, I think last night and yesterday, on another program yesterday, where you have people who are supposed to be representing the coalition, like the Christopher Jones, the Sharon Duncan, and so forth, where they are talking, using statements about Black vote matters and that kind of thing, trying to give the impression, and they're making comparison with the situation in Sophia, those votes that were disputed in Sophia, and what happened on the East Coast, and talking about the joint services votes not being counted. We have to face the reality that a community like Sophia is predominantly Afro-Guyanese. We have to face the reality that the majority in the joint services are Afro-Guyanese.
But one minute, Eddie, just maybe to let your listeners and your viewers know that the box in Sophia had a number of PPP votes, because based on the statements of poll and when they did the recount, we know how many votes the PPP would have gotten there. Of course, APNU got more votes than us in that particular box, but the PPP lost votes there as well. And then on the East Coast, we lost almost about 90 votes, right? So this thing where they're trying to use these things, and we didn't complain, because we said if they erred in not stamping those ballots, then fine, we abide by the process. And so we abided by the process on the East Coast, where we lost about 90 something votes, right? They've lost very few in that box. And in the Sophia box, we lost votes there as they did. So both parties lost votes, right? And I can't see them using that as a point of contention.
I think the issue is they're trying to use the they're trying to rile up racial strife. I mentioned that, Brigadier, because I want to bring you in here. You were part of the delegation with the president-elect, yourself, Dr. Jagdeo, and Mr. Nandalal yesterday, meeting with the Commissioner of Police. And I understand that the issue of issues like these were also discussed during that meeting. If you can just update us in terms of that meeting itself.
Well, the issue pertaining to this whole racial dimension, it was discussed indeed, but more in relation to what is happening on social media. Because, you know, you have a lot of what you call them trolls, and many of these trolls don't live in Guyana. Okay? They're commentators on social media, they live in overseas, and they tend to use that opportunity to rile up, you know, their followers here. You know, but when the situation becomes untenable in Guyana, they're safe somewhere outside of Guyana. And I think we need our people to understand that. You know, don't allow yourself to be misled, you know, to be emotionally wound up by these trolls, you know, and many of them are my Facebook friends too. So whenever they post something, I see it. And indeed, we did mention to the police force that, you know, as part of their cybercrime operation, they should really be monitoring the activities of these commentators on social media who will want to use this election situation in Guyana now, right? And introduce this whole issue about race, right? And racial discussion, and not racial discussion in the sense of racially motivated posts that could rile people up and lead to violence in our society. And that is unwanted at this stage of the game. We even have some organizations. Only this evening, I was reading a letter from an organization, some repatriation committee, right? The repatriation committee, and they're trying to, yes, talk about repatriation, but bringing in a whole set of issues pertaining to the elections and African votes, and Africans want to be led by Africans, and a whole set of issues, that really is uncalled for at this moment. I'm an African Guyanese. I'm a proud African Guyanese, but I am a member of the I'm a member of the PPPC slate. Many African Guyanese are supporters of the PPPC, okay? And the reality that needs to be registered to all Guyanese is that many African Guyanese voted for the PPPC. And that's why the PPPC won. The PPPC could not have won this election only on votes from Indian Guyanese. Many Indian Guyanese, many Amerindian Guyanese voted for the APNU AFC. So I think they should keep the issue of race outside of this discussion. This is a discussion of democracy in Guyana. The reality is that the people voted for the government that they want to lead them for the next 5 years. All of us had campaigns throughout the length and breadth of Guyana. The Guyanese people listened to us, and the Guyanese people voted. And it's a clear message that the Guyanese people, in the majority, wants the PPPC to form the government, to lead Guyana for the next 5 years. So that's a message that was clear in the numbers of the election on March 2nd. And again, it was confirmed in the recount. Notwithstanding what Mr. Mengo tried to do, and perhaps, we need to call Mr. Mengo name with every discussion on this election, because the only fraudulent act that can stand up in court, the only fraudulent act that has some credibility in the courts of Guyana, is the act committed by Mr. Mengo, with regards to the District 4 verification process that he aborted, and then used some fictitious figures, as you heard that Dr. Frank Anti mentioned, giving over 15,000 votes to the APNU AFC that they didn't, warrant. Nobody voted for them to get those 15,000 votes. And then he took away about 3,000 votes from the PPPC. This is a matter that should be before the courts. And I hope that at the end of this declaration, GCOM will continue with this matter, have it properly investigated, and collect all the evidence and place it before the court.
I want us to move to another issue, because despite the recount, we've seen again statements from the coalition saying, and some of their followers, some of those who consider themselves to be intellectual minds, talking about the results of the recount cannot be used for a declaration, and a whole host of comments with regards trying to somehow, and I think this fits into their excuses and allegations, trying to discredit the elections, in a bid maybe to hold on to power while we get fresh elections, which I think it's completely out of sight at this point in time. But you know, there is this narrative that the elections were fraudulent or there were irregularities. So the recount results cannot be used for the declaration. But on the other hand, the world over has a different view where many countries, organizations who would have participated as observers in the electoral process on March 2nd and beyond have said that elections day, all the activities were free, fair, and credible. We had most recently, with regards to the recount, we had the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo talking about using the results of the recount to ensure that the credible data is used to declare the elections results. And then we have most recently Prime Minister Ralph Gonzalez, giving his bit about the electoral process. I want to play Dr. Gonzalez's video first, and then we're going to go into some discussions because the attack has now been launched on Dr. Gonzalez, like they always do with every other person who do not share their view. So let us maybe take a look at Dr. Gonzalez's statement, and then we come back and have some discussions. The phone and WhatsApp, but there was recently some developments in as it relates to the election result. So yes. For quite some time, and it is considered that we see.
Yeah.
All right, I understand you guys weren't able to hear um, Dr. Gonzalez there.
He stated that this can be gleaned from the
I
public statement nations accounts.
I do apologize there. Um, Let me just say it quickly because I don't want to go back over all 4 minutes of that video. Um, and I suspect both of you would have seen the video earlier. And for the viewers who haven't seen the video, I would encourage you to go to the People's Progressive Party Civics Facebook page. The video is there. In essence, what Dr. Gonzalez would have said is that there were no complaints on elections day by anybody, any one of the stakeholders about any problems with the process. They all accept that the process was free and fair. The problem came with the count of the vote, particularly in District 4, when Mr. Mingo abandoned the statements of poll and moved to using a spreadsheet with fictitious numbers. His point really is that once GCOM has no other option but to use the data from the recount, the information from the recount, the numbers from the recount to declare a winner. He made it absolutely clear that CARICOM will not allow anyone to steal an elections and that he stands with democracy. The problem is, Mr. Gonzalez, Dr. Gonzalez, my apologies, since his statement has now come in for a lot of attack by the coalition. This is a trend. This has been a trend. So all of a sudden, we start talking about sovereignty. We start talking about why people shouldn't interfere in our affairs. And I think totally oblivious of the fact that we're living in a global village. Dr. Anthony?
Well, I mean, we have seen this throughout the electoral process, that when somebody make an objective statement about the process and what has happened, that the APNU and AFC would turn on them and attack them. So we have seen this trend over this period of the elections. Bruce Golding, a former Prime Minister of Jamaica, was here as the head of the OAS team. When he presented the report to the OAS, after that report was presented, you see there was an attack on Bruce Golding. Owen Arthur was here as the head of the Commonwealth team, another former Prime Minister, a former Prime Minister of Barbados. When Mr. Arthur, well, they haven't done their final report as yet, but while he was here, and when they made statements pertaining to how the Minister of Foreign Affairs had harassed them and threatened them with taking away their accreditation, suddenly they got into the APNU AFC bad books, right? So we have seen this pattern. The United States, who have remained engaged from the beginning of this process and continue to be engaged at a very senior level with the Secretary of State, Mr. Mike Pompeo, talking about this process, and more recently would have mentioned that we need to use what emerges from the recount to make the declaration. So what Prime Minister Gonzalez have echoed is not nothing new. The main reason for doing a recount is a simple thing, and that is we need to get back the results of the elections. And we have all agreed that the way to do that, we are going to go and open the ballot boxes. We are going to count what is inside, and then we are going to certify what we have counted, and then we are going to use that to make a declaration. So I don't think there was any doubt in anybody's mind about this process. And that process is clearly laid out in the order that GCOM has printed, right, and gazetted. So we started out, we opened those boxes, we look at what is in there, we have counted what is in there, we have generated a statement of recount, we have tabulated those statements of recount, and now Mr. Lowenfield basically got to write his report and add the various districts up together so that we can have a national level declaration. That's all he has to do. So the process in everybody's mind is clear. If we were not going to use the statements of recount to tabulate them and to then declare the elections, then why did we do a recount process? Why did we engage in a recount process? The mere fact that President Granger and Dr. Jagdeo agree with the CARICOM people to go and do a recount means that once you open the box and you count them and you tabulate them and you certify them, then those numbers are the numbers that you are going to use to declare the elections. They can't be nothing else. So this last minute trying to now that you're staring defeat with these numbers, that you now want to go back and revert back to the fraudulent numbers of Mingo, then something got to be wrong with you, right? So suddenly APNU, in finding favor with the real numbers that emerge out of the box, they want to discredit those numbers that people sat for the last 30-something days and counted, and these numbers emerge out of these boxes, real numbers. And these numbers have now been certified. And everybody agree with this certificate coming from every district, right? Even them, they sign off on Region 1. And because they know what would happen when they come to Region 4, they give instructions to their team in the tabulation room not to sign any more of the certificates. But every other party that was in there and witnessed this tabulation sign on, right? So the basic thing now is you have to use the numbers that emerge from the recount process to go and declare the elections. APNU don't like those numbers because those numbers now exclude the Mingo fraud. And the only way they were getting victory was when Mingo gave them that victory by giving them about 15,000 fictitious votes. And that is where the fraud is. And that was what was uncovered. And we know the boxes that it came from. We know every single box where it came from. And we know by how much they got at each of those boxes. Right? So later on, as Brigadier was saying, later on, those things are going to go before the courts because we know exactly where this fraud was perpetuated. So APNU can't want, they're trying desperately now to discard the recount numbers. And that is why every time a credible leader come up and endorse that you need to use these recount numbers, that is why they're getting so vicious. Because they know once these recount numbers are used, they have lost the elections. They should have known that since after the close of poll on the 2nd of March. And in fact, they do know that, but they refuse to accept that. Well, this recount has now certified, because we have certified all the districts, we have now certified that they have lost the elections. And it's just a matter of time before that declaration is made. Right? So they can jump high and they can jump low. The numbers are there. The whole world has seen the numbers.
Well, as they said, Dr. Anthony, and this was their line, numbers don't lie. And we agree with them. The numbers are not lying. But Brigadier, I want to bring you in because, like Dr. Anthony said, something has to definitely wrong. If every single other person is seeing the numbers from the recount are the accurate numbers, and just one group coincidentally happens to be the people who are in power and who don't want to give up power. I mean, the entire world wrong and only you right? Mike Pompeo, I think they are attacking him. Dr. Gonzalez, they're attacking. Every single person.
Well, you know, this is democracy, right? We're upholding democracy. And any organization and any individual who add their voice to the need to upholding democracy in Guyana will be targeted by these losers, right? This is not a game. This is not a game for children. In fact, you have to be 18 and above, you know, to register and to vote, right? This is a game for adults. And Mr. Gonzalez quite rightly said at the end of that statement, take your licks like a man. You know, that's an important part of his statement, you know. I mean, he used a Caribbean term that we're all familiar with. Take your licks like a man. We entered into this race because we feel that each one of us, with our manifesto, you know, can go to the people, communicate with the people, and get the people to vote for us so we can get a 5-year term to lead this country, to develop this country. In essence, that's a democracy, you know. I mean, the people have an opportunity to listen to us and to decide who they will vote for. The people exercise that will on the 2nd of March, the will of the people. Everything after then sums up to respecting the will of the people. So if the people voted for the PPPC as against the APNU AFC, take your licks like a man, right? You've lost the election. Go back to the drawing board and come next 5 years when we get the election again. And that's what Ralph was saying, you know, Dr. Ralph, take your licks like a man. You know, you cannot be in power forever in a democracy. You're going to be there for a long time, but not forever. The reality is that 5 years ago, this coalition won the elections 5 years ago, right? They won the elections against the PPPC, who was in power for 23 years before then. And what happened? The PPPC never said, look, we will not or we should not lose an election. The PPPC respect the will of the people. They respected the will of the people then. They accept that, look, this is a democratic framework. It's not a dictatorship. And the will of the people, once respected, you have to now adopt all your actions to suit that. And they demitted office. The results came out and they demitted office. And they went back to the drawing board and they came up with a strategy, a winning strategy. This coalition is operating as if they're not ready to leave office, but fine. Nothing wrong if they're not ready to leave office, but your reality is that you have to win the election to remain in office. They've lost the elections. And the earlier that they stop lying to their supporters and communicate to the supporters that we have lost these elections, you know, is it better for us and better for their supporters. And not to have their leaders going on social media and criticizing their own polling agents. The whole polling agency were criticizing for doing a bad job, you know. And then you had what they should have had Operation Eagle Eye before, and now they're doing the Eagle Eye as part of the recount. This recount started with them doing an Eagle Eye, and then afterwards, you know, it suddenly changed. They don't want nothing to do with the recount any longer. Because you know why? As Dr. Frank mentioned, by close of business on the 3rd of March, they were in possession, just like us, they were in possession of the statement of polls from GCON. And they did the same thing that we did. They tabulated those statements of poll, and they knew that they lost these elections. They knew that they lost these elections then. And that's why Mr. Mingo, and you know, it's important Mr. Mingo goes before the courts, because I would want to say Mr. Mingo did not act it alone. And we need to have this case before the court so we can get to the bottom of it to find out who were the collaborators with Mr. Mingo. Who were the collaborators with Mr. Mingo? You know, very important.
Well, I guess all of that would come out later on.
Certainly.
But you know something. They're talking about this Operation Eagle Eye, and maybe that's meant to say that they're going to have eyes on the process, and they're going to be looking at this process in such a detail. But you know the problem that they have, maybe they're looking and they're seeing, but they're not understanding what they're seeing because the numbers are there.
Numbers are there.
And is not processing the numbers.
Well, they have a problem with arithmetic.
Telling them, yeah, the numbers are telling them that you have lost the elections, but somehow they got this mathematic, you know, they got a block to mathematics. You know, every time they hear this word mathematics, right, it goes wrong for them. Because you know, with the no confidence motion, then you got all kinds of things they try with mathematics. And I understand now that in one of the columns of Kaitro News, Dembai said that the children now want Mingo to mark the paper. You give them extra, right? I mean, that's how people are making light of the thing. It's like you're going to a cricket match, right? And two sides playing, and the man was scoring the thing, decide to give one side more runs than the other. They may make the runs on the field, right? They may make nothing on the field, but
they're the books
scoring, he cooking the books, he giving them extra. And that is what happened in Region 4. Mingo was the scorer, he cooked the books for them. But he get catch. It looked like we Operation Eagle Eye catchy. Right? And that's what happened.
Eagle Eye operation before.
But the thing is, you know, Dr. Anthony, Brigadier Phillips, the reality is, and I think the supporters of the coalition, many of them, have come to the realization that, look, these people are trying very, very hard to make us fools, because there is nothing you can do. When you look at the statements of poll and you look at the statements of recount, any sensible, rational person will say the PPP, the copies of the statements of poll that the PPP would have uploaded on that website are almost matching. If you look at Region 4 results, for example, where Mr. Mingo did the rigging and they increased the numbers. When you look at the statements of poll and you look at the statements of recount, the difference in vote for the APNU AFC between the recount and the statement of poll, 9 votes. 9 votes. Not 100, not 900, 9 single votes. So, I mean, your supporters are seeing this. Mr. Granger and his team need to recognize that the people have made a decision not to let them continue in office. Why? Because their legacy includes Durban Park, emptying the treasury, closing down Gaisuko, fire people, nothing that benefited the people of this country. I don't know which bubble they're living in to think that they did so much that they have a birthright to continue to rule this country.
Well, you're forgetting the 200 taxes.
Of course, those are
You're
the look.
forgetting the shortages in the hospital when people can't get their medication. You forget how they put taxes on some of these medication, right?
Yes.
So that ordinary people, when they're sick and they have to go to get certain services, that all these services were increased by 14%. Right? You're forgetting what they did with the old people, take away their subsidies for electricity,
The
take
school
away
children.
subsidies for water, took away the voucher from the school children, right? So in a
Increase
very
their salary
short,
by 50%.
in a very short period of time, right? What this APNU and AFC cabal has been able to do was to antagonize almost every single Guyanese, right? Because if they may hurt you in one way, they hurt you in another way. And many times, they hurt you so many times over because with taxes. Imagine a man got to pay more tax and then you're not Kiev, right? How is that going to work? Then the old people in the house would be getting a little subsidy on the electricity or the water, right? You take that away. The child who was getting a voucher to go to school, you take it away. I mean, they have antagonized so many people that people decided long before this election that they had enough. And then as if that was not enough, it is how these ministers were flaunting it and behaving, right? Behaving with a regular person out there. Many times people had complaints and they can't see a minister up to now. When they try to go to their office to meet them, to discuss their problems, they can't see them. So people made a decision that they want the PPPC back in office. And when we were campaigning, you ain't here we go cuss up people. All we were talking about is the issues. What are we going to do to remedy some of the bad decisions that this government would have made over the last couple of years? How are we going to fix some of the mistakes that they have made? In every sector you can think about, right? Because we were talking about the taxes, how they have increased the taxes, and when we get back, what we are going to do to make sure that people are not so taxed. Because if you're taxing them so much, basically where they're going to find money to spend on other things. And so people were listening to what we were saying. Look at employment. Over the period that this government has been in office, right? More than 30,000 persons have lost their jobs in various sectors. Sugar has been highlighted because that was one of the largest ones. But look at what happened in the timber industry. Look at what happened with the small miners, right? So there were many, many people who were affected. And that was why people voted them out. And now that they've been voted out, they still didn't want to come out, right? But you know, you got a couple more days and the declaration would be made, because the process that we have agreed to is a very clear and explicit process. I know some people are worried because they're hearing some of the propaganda. They're hearing suddenly that they went and vote, but somehow their vote are not going to be counted. But imagine this, APNU is willing to use the numbers that came with the Mingo package, the fraudulent package. But the real numbers that came from the recount, they said that that is not credible. But what Mingo did and the declaration before is somehow credible. It's not the same elections. It's the same
People are
election.
delusional. They're senile. I think this election has cost them their mental faculties. They've lost it.
But we got good mental health professionals in this country. And if they need some assistance, we can write them the referral to go. I'm sure the doctors in the PPP wouldn't mind writing them the referrals so that they can go and get some mental health checkup. I mean, when you hear the kind of nonsense that is being spewed, whether it's on social media, on television, or wherever, you're thinking, are these people logical?
I mean,
Because
Doctor, before you go on, Doc, if you
huh?
to listen to Harman, Harman is now saying little children went and vote. I think he gave an age group, children. So you're right. You're right.
Look, at the end of all of this is that we understand their desperation. We can empathize with them, right? They're clutching at all kinds of straws. Right now is the children's straw. Before that, they were clutching at that people go and vote. They didn't fly, right? They clutch at the army votes weren't stamped and the discipline services vote weren't stamped. When they were shown that that was a lie, now they're coming up with all kinds of other excuses. At the end of the day, they can pontificate and they can go out there and try to fool people. I don't think people are going to be fooled, right? People are not going to be fooled. People have had enough. People are tired. And what we have right now in this country, we have this political crisis that, this APNU cabal has taken us into. We also have a health crisis because the COVID-19 pandemic is still with us and they have mismanaged that, right? And of course, because of their policies, we also have an economic crisis on our hands. So when we get back in, we have a lot of repair to do because of the damage that APNU and AFC has done to this country. They have damaged us because they have damaged democracy in many ways. They have damaged this country's international reputation. They have damaged the finances of this country. They have run us bankrupt, right? So we have all of that to fix. And we don't mind because we have taken a bankrupt country from them before. And when I said before, the PNC, and we were able to fix it so that the people of this country can enjoy prosperity. And so when we go back there in a couple of days, because once that declaration is made, we'll be getting back there. We will then start to rebuild this country. And we don't have room for any divisiveness. This country can only go forward when every citizen of this country put their shoulder to the wheel. Because we have to operate as Team Guyana. When we operate as a team, then this country can move forward. So now is not the time for divisiveness as they're trying to do. Now is the time for us to come together as Guyanese brothers and sisters so that we can put our shoulders to the wheel and move this country forward. The time for foolishness done. The time for all this backwardness and so on that has been going on for too long, we need to stop it. This country needs to move forward. And that is what the PPPC is all about. We want this country to go forward. We want us to come together as one nation, one people with one destiny. That is what it's all about. That's our national motto. And that's where we all have to work. Don't let them divide us. Don't allow them to have this tug of war because that only benefits one set of people. right? One set of people, and it's not just PNC people, it's a little cabal that they're at the top that is clinging desperately for power. A lot of the ordinary PNC supporters, they understand what went down. And they said they don't want to have any part of this. A lot of the middle class PNC supporters, and I call them PNC, right? They don't want to have a part of this because when you talk to a lot of guys, you know what they say? They say, man, we're ashamed. We're ashamed of what these guys are doing. So it's not, we shouldn't be blaming the PNC in totality. What we should be doing is that there are a few people there that is clinging on, and those are the people that need to go. And the rest of people we can work with because we have worked with them before and they work well, you know. So I think this country need a breather, and this, the earlier the APNU and AFC concede the elections, the faster we can get on with this task of nation building.
Brigadier Phillips, your closing comments.
Well, the transition has started already because the writing is on the wall. We basically have to follow the law and wait on GCOM. GCOM will make their announcement on or before the 16th, but we've already started, you know, the transition to the new government. The feeling is already out there, and a lot of Guyanese are looking on, and they're expecting us to do wonders in the first 100 days. I can tell you that I've been talking to people, and I can assure all Guyanese that we will be putting together our team to start working in their interests from the time the new president, Dr. Irfan Ali, was sworn in. We are ready to work. We've been ready to work start working almost 100 days ago. And we remain ready to work. And remember, we campaign on our slogan, Stronger Together for a Better Guyana. And as Dr. Frank mentioned, all shoulders to the wheel. Whether you voted for the AP and UAFC, that's not important to us. Get on board and let us develop Guyana. A Guyana that all of us can be proud of, a Guyana that we will hand over to our children, and be very proud that we've brought it to a stage and they will now take it to a higher level. So I appeal to the Guyanese public to be calm, await the declaration, and the only thing GCOM can do is do a declaration on the 16th. And as you mentioned, the Constitution is very clear. There has been a winner. The winner is Dr. Irfan Ali, and he will be the next president. Be calm, wait until he's sworn in, and let us work together to make Guyana a better place for all of us.
Dr. Anthony, Brigadier Phillips, thank you guys so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to our viewers. Have a good rest of the evening.